So, dear students, we are going to discuss a very important concept of literary criticism and literary theory, and that is archetypal theory and criticism. You must have attended my lecture on new criticism and Chicago School of Criticism, where in new criticism, I told you how a text is kept in vacuum for interpretation and how diction is important in a text. In Chicago School of Criticism, who are also called Neo-Aristotelians, how structure becomes very important, how they followed Aristotle's, elements, the plot character. They are significant along with the diction. In archetypal criticism, we're going to discuss how critics say that mythical patterns decide the meaning of a text. Before I start discussing about archetypal theory and criticism, let me tell you the meaning of archetype. Archetype means the original pattern or model. The original pattern or model of which all things of the same type are representations or copies. The another word which you can use for that is prototype. So archetype is a statement. It's a statement, a pattern of behavior, prototype, first form, or a main model that other statements, patterns of behavior, and objects copy, emulate, or merge into. You can also call it standard example or basic example. So, archetypals are the recurring patterns. Recurring patterns. Archetypal theory and criticism, though often used synonymously with myth theory or myth criticism, has a distinct history and process. Archetypal criticism assumes that there is a collection of symbols, images, characters, motifs that suggest basically the same response in all people. The term archetype can be traced back to Plato. And if you look at this word, that this is from two Greek words, arche and typos. Arche means original and typos means form. So archetype means original form. Now, I'll give you the examples of few, critics, and I'll tell you that who popularized this and who laid the foundation of that. Now, the concept gained currency in 20th century. And you know, I'll tell you later that how this criticism, not only in literary criticism but in anthropology and psychology, it gained its importance. It gained currency in 20th century literary theory and criticism through the work of Swiss writer, founder of analytical psychology. And the name of that writer is C.G. Young. You'll pronounce it Young. Now, archetypal criticism argues that archetypes determine the form and function of literary works. And the meaning of a text is shaped by cultural and psychological myths. Emphasizing on the point that archetypal criticism argues that archetypes determine the form and function of literary works, and the text meaning is shaped by cultural and psychological myths. Archetypes are the unknowable basic forms. They are personified and they can be concretized also. They are personified or concretized in recurring images, symbols, or patterns. Now, archetypal critics find a new criticism too atomistic. They found new criticism too atomistic. Why? Because they found it too atomistic in ignoring intertextual elements. They said the new critics ignored intertextual elements and they put the text in vacuum. And the critics think that text cannot be put in vacuum. They say that surely meaning cannot exist solely on the page of a work, nor can that work be treated as an independent entity. So here lies the difference. Archetypal literary criticism is a type of analytical theory that interprets a text by focusing on recurring myths and archetypes in the narrative, as I told you, in symbols, in images, and the character types. Now, the first important text which we find, which was published in 1934, is the Archetypal Patterns in Poetry. Archetypal Patterns in Poetry by Maud Bodkin. This is a text which plays a very important role in myth criticism. Now, the names and the texts, they are very important whenever you are going to discuss myth criticism. I've just given you the name of Maud Bodkin, who wrote Archetypal Patterns in Poetry. Now, archetypal literary criticism, its origins are rooted in two other academic disciplines, as I told you in the beginning. Its root is found in two other disciplines. And these two disciplines are social anthropology, social anthropology and psychology. Social anthropology and psychoanalysis. Each contributed to literary criticism in separate ways. We have one writer of social anthropology and one of psychoanalysis. Fraser, I'll tell you later, and Young. I have just told you that its roots are there other disciplines of social anthropology and psychoanalysis, but archetypal criticism peaked in popularity in 1940s and 1950s, largely due to the work of a Canadian literary critic, and his name is Northrop Frye. He is a Canadian writer. I have seen in post-graduation entrance examination, research eligibility test, and UGC NET examination, most of the time questions are asked from this pattern, that Northrop Frye belongs to which country, then Fraser's book, and then Young's book, and all that. So we have one writer from social anthropology, one of psychoanalysis. They played a very important role in the development of archetypal criticism, but it gained its importance when Northrop Frye published some of his important works, a Canadian writer. Now the archetypes, when we say archetypes can be divided into categories. Now we have the archetypes related to conflicts, related to characters, related to situations, related to themes, related to myths, and related to symbols. So we have the recurring patterns related to conflicts, characters, and all that. For example, when we come to conflicts, so what kind of recurring conflicts, archetypal conflicts, which we generally find? For example, young versus old, strong versus weak, rich versus poor, insiders versus outsiders, dream versus reality, men versus women, and so on. When we come to archetypal characters, we have the characters like innocent youth, like devil, like dreamer, like magician, like warrior, like hero, like wanderer, and so on. These are the archetypal characters. There is some archetypal situation also. Like, for example, being tempted, this is the archetypal situation, very often described. Falling from a high position, being reborn, loss of innocence, quest, and many more. When you talk about archetypal myths, what are the archetypal myths? We have, for example, Adam and Eve as the recurring myth used, Garden of Eden, Faust and Mephistopheles, and so on. When you talk about archetypal symbols, then we have symbol of water, sea, garden, sun, colors, flowers, rain, fire, flooding, animals. So these are the recurring symbols. As I told you, that the anthropological origin of archetypal criticism can be predate its analytical psychology origins by over 30 years. I mentioned the name of J.G. Fraser, an anthropologist, Scottish anthropologist. Scottish anthropologist. Now, he wrote a book, The Golden Bough. The Golden Bough, very important text. This is the first influential text dealing with cultural mythologies. Now, the Golden Bough, since reference has come, so I would like to tell you that this is the text which played a very important role in the wasteland. T.S. Eliot took inspiration from this book. Fraser influenced T.S. Eliot too much. While Fraser's work deals with mythology and archetypes in material terms, the work of C.G. Young, I have already told you, C.G. Young, Swiss writer. In contrast, he talks about unconsciousness, inaccessible part of the mind. From a Jungian perspective, myths are the culturally elaborated representations of the contents of the deepest recess of the human psyche. He talks about deepest recess of human psyche. And here lies the world of archetypes. So archetypes are there at the collective unconscious stage. Now, the collective unconscious or the objective psyche is a number of innate thoughts, feelings, instincts, and memories that reside in the unconsciousness of all people. And he talks about that. As I told you in the beginning, that we have the example of Maud Bodkin, we have the example of J.G. Fraser, we have the example of Carl Jung. But it was until the work of the Canadian literary critic Northrop Frye that archetypal criticism was theorized in purely literary terms. So credit goes to Northrop Frye, who made it popular. The major work of Frye's to deal with archetypes is Anatomy of Criticism. Anatomy of Criticism. This is a work by Northrop Frye. But his essay, The Archetypes of Literature, Archetypes of Literature, remains largely unchanged in Anatomy of Criticism, and it is a precursor to the book. Frye's work helped displace new criticism as the major mode of analyzing literary texts. As all of you know, the new criticism was very popular during 20s and 30s. And when Frye's work appeared on the scene, it displaced new criticism as the major mode of analyzing literary texts. There are two basic categories in Frye's framework: comedic and tragic. Each category is further subdivided into two categories: comedy and romance for the comedic, and tragedy and satire for the tragic. Now, the aim of archetypal criticism is in line with methodology of the formalist school. This formalist school, which delves beneath the surface of a literary text in their search for recurrent deep structures. Formalist school actually tried to search for deep structures, what lies inside the text. Similarly, archetypal critics also tried to find out the mythical structure, the intensity of the myths. As I told you in the beginning, the archetypal criticism was given impetus by Maud Bodkin's book Archetypal Patterns in Poetry, and it was flourished during 1950s and 1960s. Some other important practitioners of various modes of archetypal criticism are G. Wilson Knight. Names are very important because they are very often asked in the examination also. Robert Graves, Philip Wheelwright, Richard Chase, Leslie Fielder, and Joseph Campbell. In his 1949 book, Hero with a Thousand Faces, Hero with a Thousand Faces, this man, that is Campbell, he pioneered the idea of monomyth, though the term was borrowed from James Joyce. But this term was, he pioneered this term monomyth. Monomyth means a universal pattern in heroic tales across different cultures and genres. So what you need to know about archetypal criticism is that what is the meaning of archetype? When did archetypal criticism begin? How was it popular in social anthropology and psychoanalysis? How it came into literature? Who are the pioneers in anthropology and psychoanalysis? Who made it popular in literary criticism? What are the major recurrent, archetypal, patterns? Like what are the archetypal themes or the characters or the situations? And how was it made popular by Northrop Frye through his text Anatomy of Criticism? Thank you very much.